What's up, my weasels? It's Dev from Mtg. We like it of magic, and today I got more Theros spoiler fun time. Whoopee waka waka for you. In case you haven't seen the video that we did the other day where we rated Ashiok and Athreos and Elspeth and all of them, then go check that out. Link in the description. We tried a neat little 1 to 10 ranking system in that video. I'm going to try to keep that up in this video. But before I get to the cards that I think are worth assigning a numerical grade to, let's go over some kind of lower rarity stuff that's not super exciting, but we got to talk about it anyway because you want to know what's in the set, right? Here's Colossus' design. It's a piece of crap. 5 mana and a green for a sorcery. Creatures you control get +X/+X till end of turn, where that X is equal to your devotion to green, but it doesn't give you trample or any other kind of evasion or anything, which I think isn't necessarily good, but it might be a nice little limited game winner, but I probably wouldn't play more than one copy of this, and you'd have to be playing a lot of creatures and a very high devotion to green, so I'm just not even sure how well it would work in limited, where you're probably going to be playing 2 colors, but that's not always a guarantee, so I've always been a little off devotion in limited, but this might be a good set for it. I guess we'll have to wait and see, but this card just doesn't look too impressive to me, so I'm going to move on to Commanding Presence, which is 4 mana, 3 and a white. For an enchantment, it's an aura that enchants a creature, and enchanted creature gets +2/+2, has first strike, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, so if you're ahead, it puts you even farther ahead with each combat step. If you're behind, it gives your creature +2/+2, first strike, allows it to hang back and block. Again, a decent little limited aura thing, but again, I'm not really sure how impressed I am by this, but you got to know that it's in the set. Same thing with Inevitable End, because this has a hidden mode on it. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for an aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature has, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. So sometimes you're going to 2 or even 3 for 1 opponents who are bad at making decisions by putting this on their biggest creature, and then maybe they'll sacrifice a creature smaller than the thing that this is on during their upkeep. And the next turn, they'll have to make the same decisions. So if they're not careful, they can easily get 2 or 3 for 1 by this aura, and that's sweet, but very often it's going to end up being like a 3 mana delayed edict effect that just makes your opponent sacrifice whatever creature you stuck it to. But there is kind of a hidden mode on this card, because they have sort of reprinted heroic in this set, but they haven't keyworded it or anything, because we saw a few cards in the leak that had effectively heroic on them. And today we also saw Hero of the Winds. This is 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 1/4 human soldier with flying, and whenever you cast a spell that targets it, creatures you control get +1/+0 till end of turn. So again, like a hidden mode on Inevitable End would be, I have a Hero of the Winds out, let me target Hero of the Winds with Inevitable End, knowing that I'm going to get some kind of anthem effect. You might be able to alpha strike that turn and end the game before you ever have to worry about Inevitable End's downside. So I could see, again, Inevitable End having a sort of hidden mode on these heroic creatures that just don't have the heroic keyword on them, and we know there are a few of them in the lower rarities. While we're looking at commons that probably don't matter too much, here's Borne Colossus. It is 6 mana for a 6/7. That's all it does, except for provide a big pile of devotion. But if you're looking for something to ramp towards in your limited deck, Borne Colossus is probably a great option because it's common. And 6/7 is actually like pretty decent stats, even if it doesn't trample or have any other keyword abilities or anything. Just the fact that it provides so much devotion and has a really nice body for the cost probably makes it a pretty decent common, not premier or anything, but again, a good target to look for if you're looking to ramp in your limited. There are also some removal pieces at the common level that we saw that actually require some talk. There's Revoke Existence, Mire's Grasp, and Memory Drain. I think all of these are okay in their own right and deserve some examination. Revoke Existence is 2 mana for a sorcery that exiles an artifact or enchantment, so it's a disenchant that trades in instant speed for an exile clause, which might actually be really nice. It's tough to replace instant speed, but do note that in limited, this is very often going to just be exile target creature for 2 mana and sorcery speed, because there's a lot of enchantment creatures in this set, so that is definitely food for thought in limited. You might be able to main deck this really easily because there's just a glut of enchantment creatures in the set in the first place, but this is also able to take out things like the buy a box promo forever, for instance, and that might be kind of important, so keep that in mind too. I think there's some niches that Revoke Existence might fit into, but at the very least, it's going to be a very limited playable card. Now, Mire's Grasp might also suffer from not being instant speed. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for an enchantment. It's an aura, and the enchanted creature gets -3/-3. Again, pretty decent little piece of removal here that can pick up like indestructible creatures. That's kind of nice, but there's probably not too much that we're worried about in that avenue at the moment, at the very least. But even so, even if it doesn't kill the creature entirely, this can make like a questing beast a 1/1, so that's kind of neat. You know, there are definitely some cool applications for the card, and even if you don't kill the creature, you at least kneecap it entirely in most cases. So I do really like Mire's Grasp, but we'll have to wait and see whether or not the season is standard play. If there is like an Enchantments Matters player's deck that plays black, this might actually be really, really good in it. But, well, again, this is one of those that I'm open to, and I think that -3/-3 for 2 is historically a pretty good rate, but sorcery speed does hinder this quite a bit. Now, Memory Drain is hindered by being a 4-mana counterspell. It's just 4 mana, instant, counter target spell, scry 2. Now, scry 2 is where I think this becomes a pretty decent card. You know, not long ago, I believe in the last Theros, actually, we had 3 mana counter target spell, scry 1, and that was extremely heavily played. Dissolve, I believe. Now, adding a mana to it makes the card much, much worse, but in the current environment, in a lot of control decks, there are going to be a lot of turns where you're effectively holding up 5 mana to scry with Castle Vantress at the end of your opponent's turn anyway. So you might as well play like a one-of Memory Drain, because very often you're going to be able to scry 2 for 4 mana, which is, again, effectively less than scrying with a Castle Vantress. And scry 2 is actually, like, incredibly powerful. It's not quite draw a card or anything, but in a control deck, this can really help seal the deal. And getting your spell countered, like your very important, like, Nissa or something like that, you know, turn 4 or 5 spell, and also your control opponent gets to scry 2, it really feels bad when you're on the receiving end of that. So I think Memory Drain might actually be a little bit better than people are judging it, but still not great, obviously. Now, before we get to the cards that I think are worth like serious analysis today, let me stop off and look at these Planeswalker deck Planeswalkers, starting with Ashiok, Sculptor of Fears. This is 6 mana, 4, a blue and a black for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker with +2, draw a card. Each player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. -5, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And -11, gain control of all creatures target opponent controls. Now, you'll almost never get to this ultimate. It's like 5 turns away from the starting loyalty, so that takes forever, but it probably will win the game if you ever actually do get to it. So that's pretty cool, but I'm actually not too high on the ultimate. Again, it just takes way too long to get to, even more than ultimates traditionally do. So screw that ultimate. Really, I'm more fascinated by the fact that the +2 and the -5 work really, really well together. I like that each player puts the top 2 cards of the library into the yard, so if you are looking to reanimate your stuff, you can do that. Or if you're just looking to fill your graveyard for whatever other reason, Ashiok can help you do that while also drawing a card and going up to 6 loyalty, which is pretty decent, but 6 mana is an awful lot. And the -5 can't be done the first turn that you play it, so you have to, you know, +2 and then next turn -5 it and get something out of a graveyard. And even though these are powerful abilities, I'm just not seeing how this could be any good even out of a Planeswalker deck. I mean, there are definitely boards you could set up to make this like a game-winning card, but it's just really, really slow rolling, and the -5 is probably the best ability on it, but even that takes at least 1 turn, and that's assuming it doesn't get attacked into. So I don't like this even in terms of Planeswalker deck Planeswalkers, but I can't necessarily say the same thing about Elspeth's Undaunted Hero. This is surprisingly actually kind of decent looking. This is 5 mana, 2 and 3 white for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker. If you +2 Elspeth, you put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. If you -2 Elspeth, you can search your library and or graveyard for a card named Sunlit Hoplite and put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library this way, you shuffle it. Now, if you -8 Elspeth, until end of turn, creatures you control gain flying and get +X/+X, where X is your devotion to white. So, if you still have Elspeth out, they get at least +3/+3, but if you went and got a Sunlit Hoplite, we still don't know what this creature is, but you very likely have at least another devotion to white, if not 2 more devotion to white, depending on what the creature's, you know, casting cost is. We don't know if the creature's a 1, 2, 3 drop, whatever. So, a lot of the evaluation on this card is whether or not Sunlit Hoplite is any decent and any good, and it probably isn't, to be honest. You know, it's a Planeswalker deck card in all likelihood, so it probably isn't great. But even if it's just like, you know, a 2 mana 2/3 or something that adds to your devotion to white, that might be at least okay, you know. But I really like the +2 on this, and the eventual ultimate, which doesn't take anywhere near as long to get to as, say, the Planeswalker deck Ashiok, is actually like really, really playable, but only in like mono white decks. And honestly, the mono white decks that want this is probably a tad bit too expensive for, but it is really good just to +2 your creatures every turn until you can eventually get to the ultimate. ultimate and probably win the game with it. And I just don't think this is a terrible Planeswalker deck, Planeswalker. And it might actually be a little bit like the 5-mana Gideon from a few sets ago, where it's like right on the cusp of standard playability, but doesn't quite get there. That said, depending on how good Sunlit Hoplite is, this could actually kind of get there. I won't go all the way and say that it's better than the 4-mana Elspeth, like the joke is. That seems to be the meme today, is to say that this is better than the actual Elspeth from the actual set. It's not. You can't play it out of your graveyard, but what you can do is just make your creatures bigger every turn until you Alpha Strike when you actually do get to Ultimate, and I think that that might actually be good enough to sneak into a deck here or there, and you just really can't say that about too many Planeswalker deck walkers. This actually looks kind of attractive. But let's get into the big stuff. The stuff that I think is actually worth like assigning grades to and talking about the real pros and cons of. Starting with Daxos Blessed by the Sun. This is 2 white mana for a 2-star legendary enchantment creature with a new creature type. It's Demigod. And Daxos' toughness is equal to your devotion to white. Whenever another creature you control enters the battlefield or dies, you gain 1 life. So this is like a way better sort of impassioned orator that you can't have more than 1 copy of out at any given time, unless you have Spark Double commenters. That's they always say it. But anyway, this is at least a 2/2 Soul Warden type thing that only counts creatures you control entering the battlefield. You know, so again, it's more like Impassioned Orator than Soul Warden, but I do still kind of like this. I think that it's fine. This will probably be some sort of cycle of cards if I'm willing to guess, and I'm hoping this isn't like the worst in the cycle, but it's still kind of decent. You know, we keep seeing these life gain decks at least attempt to be something with a Johnny's Pride Mate, a Johnny's Strength to the Pride, Linden, Healer's Hawk, all that stuff, and Daxos Blessed by the Sun is just another 2-drop that could fit into these, that also increases your devotion to white and is paid off by you being, you know, high devotion to white. So I actually don't mind this. Anything that's reminiscent of a card like Soul Warden, I'll at least give a chance, because that card has a very special place in my heart. So I might be over evaluating this just because, like, I like Soul Warden so much, but I don't really care for Impassioned Orator, but this has the potential to be way better than Impassioned Orator, especially if we get some good devotion payoffs, aside from just itself. You know, this could very easily be like a 2/5 for 2 mana, and that's when it starts looking really, really good, especially as a brick wall against aggro decks and stuff. So I do think that this has plenty of pros, but the only con being that it's not very aggressive, and it's probably not very exciting, because we're all a little bit trained by now to just go ho-hum at any of these life gain cards, because it's almost always going to be like a tier 3.5, you know, semi-competitive deck, more than it is an actual deck to take seriously. And I'm trained the same way. You know, I don't think this is going to shake the world as a 2-drop or anything. It's not necessarily, but it's not going to shake the world or anything. It's not going to be amazing, but it's probably going to see some play here and there, and it's at the very least going to get tested. So in sort of a tentative way, I'm going to give Daxos Blessed by the Sun a 6.25 here. Probably somewhat standard playable, but again, only in niche decks, and even then, the deck that you put it in has to be good, but it might be really good as an enchantment creature in these Enchantments Matters decks, or in some kind of mono-white devotion / aggro deck. I could see this being a more than playable card, but even then, you can't play it in too many multiples, and extra copies that you draw after that feel really bad. So I'm just not too super high on it, but I'm probably a little bit higher on it than the majority of the community at this point. But there's another card we saw in the last couple of days that I am actually much higher on than I think a lot of people are. And that's because I think a lot of people are hesitant to really judge this card. But let's look at the Akroan War real quick. This is 4 mana, 3 and a red for a Saga. Saga's return in Theros. For Chapter 1, which, if you remember, just to refresh your memory, happens as soon as you play the card. As soon as it hits the battlefield, you gain control of target creature for as long as Akroan War remains on the battlefield. Now, on Chapter 2, on your next turn, until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each combat if able. So for 1 turn, your opponent's creatures must attack. On Chapter 3, each tapped creature deals damage equal, or to itself equal to its power. So you get like a Solar Blaze type effect. On Chapter 3, then you get rid of the Akroan War. So I actually think that this is probably a very good Magic card, but it's also really, really tough to judge. You have to play it against creature decks and stuff. It might just be like a sideboard piece, so do keep that in mind. But just the ability to pay 4 mana and steal a creature for like 2 turns, actually probably really good, especially when it lines up with stuff like Questing Beast pretty well. You know, your opponent drops Questing Beast, attacks into you next turn, a Crow in War, whoops, Questing Beast. You steal their Questing Beast, attack into them with it. Then they have to attack into your still untapped and Death Touch Questing Beast that used to be theirs. I mean, all of this seems really, really good, right? So I kind of like all of this, although they will get their beast back at the end of all of this unless you can find a way to tap it in response to this going on the stack. So I think that there are probably ways to make this card work really, really well for you. You know, we already see things like Claim the Firstborn working really well in these Witch's Ovens decks. So again, if you can find a way to maybe sacrifice or otherwise get rid of the creature before it goes back to their side of the table, or just tap it, you know, during your upkeep while the Crow and War's third chapter is on the stack. That could also work really, really well. So I think that there are definitely ways that you could make this card very good, but just looking at the very first chapter, if all a Magic card said was, you know, this is a mega threaten effect of some kind, you know, pay 4 mana, gain control of target creature for the next 2.5 turns or whatever, like, that's actually pretty good. So just for the thief effect on this, I actually kind of really like this card, especially when you consider you can throw in a bunch of sacrifice effects and otherwise, you know, ways to otherwise get rid of the creature that you stole. But it's also sort of a mini wrath effect. If you have your board set up appropriately, or if you've got enough life, then you can just withstand your opponent swinging into you. And then they just, you wrath their board the next turn. All of this seems like really good in the right situation to me, but that qualifier of having to be in the right situation really does bring the card's evaluation down quite a bit here, because again, it only works against very specific, very creature-based decks. And, you know, again, it's just kind of wonky to read it for the first time, but just gain control of a thing for a couple of turns for 4 mana is kind of good enough for me. So I'm going to give this card a 6.75. I actually think this card is quite good and way better than the majority of the community is evaluating it at this point, because it looks, again, a little bit wonky to, like, really absorb this card. And it looks like a funny Magic card. It's got that, oh, they have to attack into you ability that no one takes seriously. Although I'll say this. One more thing on this card before I get off of it. You know, that second chapter on it, almost nobody thinks that this ability is worth much mana or much time or anything, but against an aggro deck, they're probably going to want to swing into you anyway. You know, if you're up against a deck that doesn't want to swing into you, this is nothing but bad news for them, this chapter. You know, if you've got your board set up correctly, you might not even really need Chapter 3 to eviscerate their boards. I kind of like this. You know, there are a few creatures in Standard right now that people are trying to get value out of that don't necessarily attack for the win all the time, you know? So forcing them to attack might actually be a really nice way to get around certain creatures and their abilities. So there's just so much that I like about this card. I think that even if it doesn't actually actively hose anything your opponent's trying to do, it still steals one of their creatures for a couple of turns. And that's probably decent enough on turn 4 in Standard, or even turn 3 if you ramp this in. So I do like a lot about this, and again, I'll stick by 6.75. I think this is more than fringe playable, but again, it might end up just being a sideboard card. Now up next, let's look at a great looking aura, in my opinion, and it seems like not too many other serious players' opinions. Here's staggering insight right here. This is a white and a blue, just 2 mana for an aura enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has lifelink, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. That's actually quite good, in my opinion. Note that I earlier said it only costs 2 mana, which I really want to hammer in because a lot of the spikes are basically saying that 2 mana is way too much for this, because the comparison here is to a card like Curious Obsession, which I do think you can make an interesting comparison to. First of all, this costs an extra mana, but it removes, you know, the clause that forces the creature to attack every turn, and I actually think that's worth quite a bit. Not a mana, but it is worth quite a bit. Now, giving the creature lifelink and a power boost, huge deal in my opinion, and probably makes this worth 2 mana. You might not play it in the same tempo decks that you played Curious Obsession in, which I think is the major hang-up, is that this doesn't necessarily go or doesn't make the tempo deck as fast if it goes into a tempo deck. But it might not even go into a tempo deck in the first place. It might go into a more auras-based deck that focuses on cards like All That Glitters, for instance, and enchantment creatures and whatnot. It could be a great aura in those decks, but it could also be a great aura in blue-white flyers, where it'll give a creature a power boost, lifelink to help you win races against aggro decks, and you've got a bunch of evasive creatures to make sure that you actually have a Curious Obsession, right? Like, you actually do get to draw cards off of this if you have flyers, and otherwise unblockable creatures, for that matter. So I actually really, really like this card. It's kind of a Curious Obsession stapled to a Spirit Link that, you know, doesn't force the creature to attack. That seems fantastic to me. And when you talk about cards like, say, Brazen Borrower, you know, flash in Brazen Borrower at the end of your opponent's turn, And then on your turn, you can hold up a couple of mana to counter a spell, get down Staggering Insight for 2 mana, and suddenly you've got like a 4-power lifelink borrower that draws you cards when it swings in. And hits for combat damage. So that seems great. Same thing with like Fairy Vandal. You know, second turn, you can hold up Quench and Fairy Vandal. If your opponent doesn't do anything, you cast Vandal at the end of their turn. And then you can cast Staggering Insight. While holding up Mystical Dispute still, you can cast Staggering Insight on your Fairy Vandal, and suddenly it's swinging for a lot of lifelink damage and drawing you cards. So, again, I think that this is fantastic in so many different decks, and I think people are just looking at it through the lens of what Curious Obsession did and saying it's a bad card. But even if it's a little bit worse than Curious Obsession, I think that still makes it a very playable Magic card. You know, again, in the context of enchantment decks and all that glitters and stuff like that, I think this card has a shot. And in the case of, you know, heroic decks, again, we've already been shown a couple of cards that effectively have heroic without having that keyword, and Staggering Insight is going to be great on any of those creatures as well. So I just think there's a lot of little pockets this card could fit into that are just fantastic. And I know that a lot of people are sort of undervaluing it right now, saying it's not that great. But the moment that you slap this on like a 3-power flyer and you suddenly gain 4 life, you know, you hit for 4 damage and you draw a card, like all of those worries are going to go away. All of that, like this is a bad card, all of that's going to go away. If you hit with the creature even one time in combat, Staggering Insight replaces itself, which again I think really makes up for it being an aura, which is the only actual con to the card. You know, it costs 2 mana, which I guess is a con if you're comparing it to Curious Obsession. But the only other real con is that this is an aura. And that's worth, you know, docking a couple of points from its overall score. But in the end, I'm going to give this card a 7.25. A 7.25 is actually, I think, where we want to be on this card. It's a lot better than you might think it is. And it's a lot different than Curious Obsession. Again, I think that if you're comparing this to Obsession, then you're not really getting the full point of the card. Again, if it is worse than Obsession, it still might be a good card because there's a lot of room between bad card and Curious Obsession. But we go from me defending a couple of cards that I think people aren't taking seriously enough to me not taking a card seriously enough that everyone else loves. And that's the Tessin Champion. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 1/3 human warrior with Constellation. And Constellation is just, I don't know why they keyworded this one this time around. They did last time, but they didn't keyword heroic this time, right? But this is just whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you put a +1/+1 counter on champion and you draw a card. Calm down. I love it. I really do love this card. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think that it's as good as a lot of people are saying it is. I think it has the opposite problem of a card like Staggering Insight, for instance. You know, you can play this on turn 2 with a Gilded Goose or maybe after an Arboreal Grazer or something, and I think that's worth an awful lot, especially in a format where we have enchantment creatures. You know, you don't have to worry about just putting auras on Tessin Champion or something, so I think that's really, really good too. This sort of fixes the problem that cards like Argothian Enchantress had while adding another one. You know, Argothian Enchantress could never attack for the win. This can attack for the win, but it doesn't have the hexproof that Argothian Enchantress has. It's not 2 mana like Argothian Enchantress was. So I think this is just probably like way worse than a card like Argothian Enchantress, but that said, it's probably still one of the best Enchantresses I've ever seen, and I've been playing Magic for 25 years. I've been playing Magic for as long as Enchantresses have basically been a thing. One of my very first decks was Green-White Enchantress, ever. So I know a thing or two about Enchantresses, and in my mind, this is easily in the top like 3 Enchantresses ever printed. So, you know, I will say that I'm still very excited about the thing, but I do want people to keep their expectations in check because there's going to be a lot of games where you don't get any value off of this. Like whatsoever. You know, it's just a 3 mana 1/3 that dies. But that's just the dies to removal argument, and that's really the only and strongest argument against this card. But it is a pretty decent argument. That said, though, you know, if they try to, say, do something like Lightning Strike, you know, any of the red removal spells like Lava Coil or something, just playing a couple of removal spells will put, or enchantments, excuse me, will put this out of range of those red removal spells like Skewer the Critics, for instance. You know, it's already out of range of Shock. So I think that at least against red removals, it's fantastic, but especially if there's flash enchantments. Let me throw that out here too. If there's flash enchantments, this card becomes way, way better because drawing a card and making it bigger all at instant speed is going to be like a blowout. And we already have a couple of flash enchantments, I think, in the format right now. Here they are if we do have them. You know, I still think that if we have flash enchantments, this gets like way, way better. So keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, I am a little bit worried about a 3 mana 1/3 that usually has to wait a turn to get value. That's something else that kind of spooks me on this card is that unless there's like a 0 mana enchantment of some kind, and there very well may be, this isn't going to get you value till the next turn, and I really worry about skipping your turn and using your like Gilded Goose mana if you played this on turn 2. You know, getting this removed would just be a major blowout for your setup plan. So I definitely think there's a lot of risk to a very high reward here. But I would compare this just on its face to a card like Tireless Tracker, which saw an awful lot of play, similar mana cost, same mana cost really, and similar function of getting bigger as the game goes on while also getting you card advantage as the game goes on. So I could see kind of squinting and making that comparison, and if it's anywhere near as good as Tire Tracks, it's an amazing Magic card. I mean, I like so much about this card, but for some reason I kind of feel like checking myself on it a little bit, you know, like thinking maybe it's not going to be as good as we think it's going to be because of all the options that we have at the 3 mana slot right now. You know, people are dropping like Rotting Regisars and stuff for 3 mana in the standard, so I'm just not really sure how well this stacks up to certain plays, you know, like this is just going to get owned by Teferi, for instance. So I'm not super sure that this lines up very well with a lot of what's going on in the format. A lot of things we're doing are much more powerful or generate more immediate value than this can. So in the long run, in terms of standard playability, again, it lines up in funky ways with the format that I don't necessarily like. But in terms of like, oh, you want an Enchantress again for your commander deck or something, this is just an absolutely bonkers card for, you know, not only singleton formats, but I've seen people say this could see modern play as well. So I don't want to completely undervalue the card or anything, but I am going to sort of temper my expectations and not give the card an 8.25 like I want to. I'm going to give the card a 7.5, still the highest, you know, grade in the video, but at the same time, it does require a fair amount of opportunity cost to be spent to actually play this card the way you want to. A lot of your deck has to have enchantments in it, so opportunity cost is high with no actual built-in protection to it, and we don't have a whole lot of good, you know, instant speed hexproof tricks in this format right now. So I'm a little bit worried, although I do think this could go well with stuff like Dance of the Manse and even Banish into Fable. That's the name of the card. I should have known that. It was like number 1 or something on my sleepers list. But yeah, all this, any enchantment based stuff this could go well with. So I'm liking the cut of Bant enchants and all that. I think this could go well in that, but again, I'm getting ahead of myself. As much as I want to build abs and enchantments, Bant enchantments, all that fun stuff, this could go really well with Staggering Insight. Imagine throwing Staggering Insight on this, drawing a card, swinging for 2, drawing another card, or, you know, swinging for 3, excuse me, drawing another card. Like, all that could be really good. But again, I'm going to lower my expectations just a little bit and say that I'm not going to fall for this trap for like the millionth time in my Magic career. Card looks like an amazing card advantage engine for mid-range decks, but again, the opportunity cost is very, very high, and it is relatively susceptible to a wide range of removal currently being played. But that's all the Theros spoilers for now, at least. I didn't expect them to put these spoilers out in the first place after the, you know, first 3 spoilers the other day. I thought they were going to hold off till the end of the month. So who knows when we'll get more. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for the notifications so you'll know when spoilers come out and stuff. Plus all kinds of other content. We just did a Marieki Rebarrett commander deck the other day. Love the deck. It's at a great budget. And yeah, really, really, really cool commander that doesn't get enough play. So make sure you check that out. I'll leave a link in the description for you. And if you want to pre-order any of this stuff, I'll leave a link in the description to TCG players, so you can do that at super low prices. Just do all the YouTube stuff, like the video, share it around if you want more people to know what's up with the spoiler action, or, you know, do the things. Just engage in the content. Also, hit up the Patreon, link in the description for that too. If you want to support content like this and keep the lights on around here, because who knows what happens at the first of the year when Kappa goes into effect. It's a brave new world out there. It might be the Wild Wild West. So if you want to make sure that I get to keep creating content for you, then make sure you go over to the Patreon and pledge $1 a month. That's all I ask. But aside from that, I am done for this one. Just let me know how you felt about not only my evaluations, but the cards themselves down there in the comments section. Did I get anything insanely wrong this video, or are you basically in agreement? Just either way, let me know, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.